since Vanessa was tragically taken from us. Not a day goes by that we don't reflect on the enormity of our loss.
That was the choked voice of the uncle, representing the victim's family, when talking about the unjust death of Vanessa Marcotte, a young, talented, and ambitious girl, but forever gone after a seemingly normal afternoon like any other. On a summer afternoon in 2016, in the small town of Princeton, a peaceful place that had not had a murder for decades, people were shocked to hear about the disappearance of a local girl. No one could have expected that just a few hours later, the entire community would be shocked by a horrific discovery in the sparse woods. And from there, a persistent investigation began, searching for traces of the seemingly invisible culprit. Vanessa Marcotte, 27 years old, Google employee, only daughter of a single mother, disappeared without a trace after a familiar jog. But the disappearance quickly became one of the most shocking murders in America at that time. If you are interested in real, dramatic, and haunting cases like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. On Sunday afternoon, August 7th, 2016, Vanessa Marcotte left her mother's house in Princeton around 1 p.m. to go for a walk, a familiar activity every time she had the chance to go back to her hometown. That day's route was a quiet forest path, not too far from home, and with few people passing by. But no one expected that it would be the last time anyone saw her alive. A witness said that they saw Vanessa standing in front of a nearby convenience store, apparently looking for water. She was still wearing her sportswear, headphones around her neck, and her phone in her hand, the appearance of someone who was just going for a short walk. However, just a few minutes later, she completely disappeared from everyone's sight. At around 2:11 p.m., Vanessa's phone suddenly lost signal. This is considered the last time she had contact with the outside world. All calls from relatives after that fell into silence. There were no cries for help, no unusual sounds. The woods were almost deserted. However, another witness recalled seeing a dark SUV parked on the side of the road, the hood open. Next to the car was a man on his phone. About an hour later, the car was still there, but the man was gone. No one heard any signs of anything unusual. No apparent struggle, no screaming, no first-hand witnesses. It was the silence that made the incident all the more puzzling. Vanessa was a careful woman, always reporting her schedule when she left the house. She had no unexpected appointments, and she had never complained about anything worrying. When it started to get dark and her daughter still hadn't returned to catch the bus back to New York, Vanessa's mother, Rosanna, immediately felt uneasy. Her mother's instincts urged her to call the police that same evening. A search was launched involving police, dogs, and local residents. The search lasted for hours, and as night fell, there was still no trace of Vanessa. What happened in the short time between her leaving the convenience store and her phone losing signal was still a mystery. But then the pieces began to fall into place, the beginning of a journey to find the truth that shocked the entire community. As the afternoon wore on and Vanessa's daughter still hadn't returned, Rosanna, Vanessa's mother, began to feel uneasy. At first, it was just quiet worry. Maybe her daughter was jogging, lost, or her phone had run out of battery. But as time passed without any text messages or calls, the mother's intuition began to tell her that something was wrong. At around 5 p.m., she took the initiative to call the local police, expressing her concern that her daughter had left home at noon but hadn't returned. It was an instinctive decision, and it was thanks to that action that the first door of the investigation was opened. Immediately after receiving the information, the authorities mobilized staff, dividing into many groups to search around the area where Vanessa might have passed. It was still light that day. The weather was favorable for checking the trails in the forest. At about 8:20 p.m., one of the teams with the dogs found suspicious tracks in a dense brush area less than a mile from the main road. The dog led the searchers straight to a hidden spot with no clear path. It seemed that no one had ever been there before. The flashlight flickered between the dense foliage, then stopped at a motionless object lying in the short grass. The searchers immediately confirmed that it was a female body. Although there was no official identity, the shape, clothing, and location of the discovery made everyone understand that the person they had been looking for all afternoon was Vanessa. The initial state of the scene surprised the investigators. The victim's body was about 60 meters from the main road, in an area with no houses nearby. The clothes were missing, and a pair of sneakers were lying not far away, showing signs of being burned. Under the dim light, there were light burn marks on the victim's hands and feet, a sign that someone might have deliberately destroyed the evidence. Vanessa's phone and headphones were also missing from the scene. This made the investigation team suspect that they had been taken away, possibly to conceal information related to the killer. Every inch of the surrounding land was meticulously searched, but the initial results did not reveal any clear clues. The case was immediately upgraded to a major investigation. The first questions began to arise. Who could have committed the crime in such a quiet area? And why did Vanessa choose the place she knew as a scene? Everything was still a mystery at that time. Immediately after the scene was sealed off, the forensic team and investigators quickly got to work. The space around the forest, which was once quiet, became cold and tense. Every trace, no matter how small, was carefully recorded, because any detail could be the key to clarifying the case. At the location of the body, apart from a scorched shoe lying nearby, no phone or personal device was found. In particular, there were traces of grass being crushed and scratched on the ground, suggesting a struggle. There were no clear footprints due to the dry soil and thick grass, but some small pieces of half-burnt paper and faint traces of gasoline were discovered around the area. The autopsy results showed that the victim died from strangulation. There were many small wounds on the body, mostly concentrated on the hands, indicating that she had fiercely resisted. Most importantly, there were strange skin cells left under the victim's fingernails, the first biological evidence that led to the suspect. The time of death was estimated to be around early afternoon, close to the time Vanessa's phone was turned off. Another unusual detail that caught the investigators' attention: minor burns on the victim's hands and face, which were not fatal but showed that someone had intentionally set the fire after the victim had died. From there, the hypothesis was put forward. The killer may have returned to the scene to cover up the traces. This behavior opened up a new direction for the investigation, searching for people who had appeared around the area during that sensitive time frame. As soon as the coroner concluded that the victim had died from strangulation and that there were signs of post-mortem burning, the investigation entered a critical phase. The investigation team immediately expanded the scope, checking the entire route Vanessa might have traveled that fateful afternoon. Although Princeton is a small, quiet town with few camera systems, the police still collected every possible data, from traffic images to the accounts of residents. One particular clue quickly emerged. A witness recalled seeing a dark-colored SUV parked on the side of the road, near the entrance to the woods, the hood open, next to a man who appeared to be on the phone. About an hour later, the car was still there, but the man was gone. The witness description was athletic build, short hair, Hispanic. From that detail, the police began to narrow down all the suitable SUV owners in the vicinity, especially those who were in Princeton between noon and about 3 p.m. On the initial list, the name Angelo Cullen Ortiz quickly became a prominent subject, residing in Worcester, not far from the scene, working for a private delivery company, frequenting the area. When first summoned, Angelo was unpredictably calm. He claimed that he did not know Vanessa and did not remember his schedule that day. However, when questioned more closely, his answers began to become inconsistent. At times, he said he had been home all day. At other times, he said he had driven out but didn't remember where. Angelo's gestures gradually became awkward, his eyes averted, his voice began to falter, all of which made the investigators wary. The police decided to request a warrant to take a DNA sample from the suspect to compare with biological traces found under the victim's fingernails. Angelo initially signed the consent form, but his legal team later argued that his client did not fully understand his rights because of the language barrier, leading to a lengthy legal battle. Meanwhile, an independent piece of evidence was discovered, a $5 gas bill from a nearby gas station, dated 2:35 p.m., the time after Vanessa's phone went dead. This reinforced the theory that the killer had returned to the scene to destroy evidence. Then came the decisive moment. The forensic results showed that the DNA under Vanessa's fingernails was a 100% match to Angelo Colon Ortiz's. It was irrefutable evidence. The police immediately approached Angelo again, but this time he was no longer calm. When asked about the DNA, Angelo remained silent, bowed his head, and did not answer any questions, a silence that was heavy and suspicious. No confession was uttered, but the truth was clear. On April 15, 2017, Angelo Colon Ortiz was formally arrested on charges of first-degree murder and robbery. The indictment was promptly filed, with more than 200 pages of documents compiling a comprehensive compilation of physical evidence, witness testimony, and travel records. Although the attorneys sought to disprove the DNA sample by questioning the sampling procedure, the judge ultimately upheld the legality of the evidence. The case moved to trial, attracting national attention and media attention. For the people of Princeton, the shock was greater than the case itself. The suspect was someone who had been quietly appearing in town, a delivery man with no criminal record, no attention. And it was this ordinary that hid the most dangerous person. The investigation was closed after nearly a year, but the echoes and the question why still could not be fully answered. It's not just a case, but a journey to find justice for an innocent girl, and a warning about the darkness that can exist even in the middle of the day. After Angelo Colon Ortiz was indicted, the case entered the pretrial phase. Over the years, the case file was carefully reviewed, and each piece of evidence was reevaluated to ensure its rigor. A series of preliminary hearings were held, in which the legal issue of taking a DNA sample from the suspect was a point of contention. The defense argued that Colon Ortiz did not understand his rights when he signed the consent form because he did not speak English fluently. However, the prosecutor argued that the entire procedure was carried out properly with the assistance of an interpreter. Even though he did not speak the same dialect as the suspect, the judge ultimately decided to reject the request to exclude the evidence, upholding the legal value of the DNA test results. In the context of the case about to be brought to a public trial, the two sides negotiated a plea agreement. The victim's family, after years of waiting, chose the less painful path, agreeing to the prosecutor's request to avoid a lengthy trial with traumatic details. In October 2022, Angelo Colon Ortiz officially pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and robbery. In court, he did not say much, only bowing his head when the verdict was announced. The sentence was announced: 20 years in prison for robbery, followed by life with a minimum of 25 years without parole for murder, a total of at least 45 years in prison. Before the end of the courtroom, Vanessa's family was invited to speak. Her mother, Rosanna, choked up as she said that her life had completely changed since losing her daughter. "I will never have the chance to see my daughter in a wedding dress, never be the grandmother I dreamed of being," she said. Those words brought tears to many people in the courtroom. After the trial, the public reaction was largely sympathetic. Many felt relieved that justice had finally been served. even though it had taken 6 years. Thousands of shares on social media expressed their condolences for Vanessa, a talented young person who had passed away too soon. The trial ended, the verdict was issued, but the echoes of the story still linger. Not only is it a family's pain, the case is also a strong reminder that safety should never be taken for granted, even in the most seemingly peaceful places. The Marcotte family's lives have been forever changed since that fateful afternoon. Vanessa's death was not only an immeasurable loss for a mother, but also a lingering wound in the hearts of friends, colleagues, and even strangers who only knew her from the evening news. A bright future was taken away in an instant, leaving a void that nothing could fill. This case is not simply a personal tragedy, but also a wake-up call for all of us, that the line between safe and dangerous is sometimes just a few steps away. In a seemingly peaceful world, evil can still hide under the most ordinary shell, and it is vigilance and proactive self-protection that is the first shield each person can create for themselves. Justice has come, albeit late. Thanks to the tireless efforts of the investigation force and the family's perseverance, the truth has been brought to light. But no matter how harshly the perpetrator is punished, the wounds in the hearts of those left behind are still something that no court can heal. In an increasingly complex society where evil can hide behind any face, the question is, are we sober enough to recognize the danger signals before it's too late? What do you think about this heartbreaking case? If you were a relative in that situation, how would you choose to face it? Leave your comments below, and don't forget to follow the channel to continue the journey of discovering the stories behind the light of justice. A young girl walked out of a concert, disappeared into the darkness, and never returned. That's what happened to Morgan Dana Harrington, a 20-year-old student at Virginia Tech, one night in October 2009. A night that should have been filled with music and joy, but instead turned into an unexpected tragedy. America was shocked when the image of her gray-haired father, Dan Harrington, appeared on television news sobbing, "If Morgan is out there and can hear us, please come home. If someone has Morgan, please bring her home safely." Those pleading words touched the hearts of millions, but deep down, everyone felt a growing unease. Where had Morgan gone? Who was the last person to see her? And what really happened that fateful night? On the afternoon of October 17, 2009, Morgan Harrington, a 20-year-old student at Virginia Tech, and a group of friends left their dormitory to go to Charlottesville to attend a Metallica concert, an event she had been eagerly awaiting. It was supposed to be a fun day, but it turned out to be a fateful turning point that completely changed her life and that of her family. At around 8 p.m., Morgan and her friends arrived at the John Paul Jones Arena. The atmosphere was bustling and the music was loud. During the show, Morgan suddenly left her seat to go to the restroom, but when she returned, she was refused entry because of the no re-entry rule. Over the phone, she assured her friends that she would find a way to get home. That was the last time her family heard her voice. Several witnesses later reported seeing a young woman resembling Morgan walking alone near the parking lot and along the side of the road. Some said she looked confused and panicked, but no one stopped to help. A taxi driver also reported seeing a woman walking in the dark, but her face was not clear. Morgan was not a reckless person. She was always cautious and kept in close contact with friends. But that night, her phone suddenly went dead. A few days later, her handbag, high heels, and other personal belongings were found scattered on a bridge a few miles away. The first sign that something serious had happened. Friends waited in vain all night, searching everywhere, but all efforts were met with silence. When the concert ended and Morgan still hadn't appeared, they initially thought she might have taken a ride back to school or met someone she knew. But concern soon grew into fear. The next morning, Morgan's family officially reported the matter to the police. The local community immediately joined hands to search for her, with the young girl's image appearing densely on electric poles, bulletin boards, and the media. But all efforts were in vain. No one knew where Morgan had gone, who she had met, or what had happened that fateful night. There was only an eerie silence and a growing unease in the hearts of those waiting for her return. In the early days after Morgan Harrington went missing, hope was not completely extinguished in the hearts of family and friends. Everyone believed that the young girl might have simply lost her way, her phone battery died, or had some other problem but was still safe. But as the days passed without any trace, that fragile belief gradually became submerged by extreme fear. Then on the morning of January 26, 2010, nearly 3 months after that fateful night, a heartbreaking turn occurred. An Albemarle County farmer, while checking the fence and pasture on his Anchorage farm, accidentally discovered a human skeleton lying quietly under some low bushes. It was a deserted field, about 10 miles from where Morgan went missing, a place so remote that few people visited. Immediately, he called 911, his voice barely concealing the horror. "I think I just found human remains. Please send someone here right now." Less than 30 minutes later, the investigation team, forensics and police were on the scene, cordoning off the entire area. The sight before them was deafening. In the middle of an empty field were nearly naked remains, torn clothes, a few pieces of fabric, and other items that had been damaged by weeks of rain, wind, and nature. Forensic experts quickly determined that the body was a woman. Although there were very few physical traces left, the initial characteristics matched the disappearance of Morgan Harrington that had been reported in the media for a long time. The Harrington family was notified, and when the DNA results confirmed the worst, the last hope was lost. Morgan had been found, but not alive. The grief is overwhelming as her parents, who have always believed that their daughter would return, are forced to confront the harsh truth. But the case does not end there. This discovery is just the beginning of a long and arduous journey to find justice. Who brought Morgan to that desolate place? What happened in her final hours? And why did this haunting go unnoticed for months? The answers are still waiting to be revealed. The scene where Morgan Harrington's body was found was a desolate grass field, far from residential areas and major roads, a location so remote that it seemed to have been deliberately chosen. The investigation team found no obvious signs of a struggle, no signs of a motor vehicle or suspicious objects. The only thing left was a skeleton lying alone, surrounded by dry leaves and weeds, as if time and nature had deliberately concealed the crime. Forensics carefully examined every small detail. Through examination, they determined that the body was that of a young woman, matching the description of Morgan Harrington. Bone analysis showed that the victim had died several weeks ago, consistent with the time of her disappearance. In particular, some injuries on the skeleton showed strong external impact, a sign of violence before death. However, due to the severe decomposition of the body, determining the exact cause of death became extremely difficult. One detail that caught investigators' attention was the location of the body. It wasn't on any well-trodden route, nor was it a random destination. Someone had deliberately brought Morgan here, away from the lights, away from human eyes. While no weapon or obvious physical evidence was found at the scene, the forensic team had collected some biological samples that had remained, opening up the possibility of DNA traces. These small clues laid the foundation for the arduous journey ahead. After Morgan Harrington's body was found, the investigation officially entered a tense and challenging phase. With very little physical evidence, no specific witnesses, and a crime scene that left almost no clear traces, the police force knew they were facing a complex case that required patience, caution, and determination. The first step was to screen everyone who had been at the Metallica concert that day. Tens of thousands of people attended, making the screening process extremely difficult. However, thanks to the security camera system around the stadium area and the ticket sales list, they gradually narrowed down the scope of the investigation. Witnesses who had seen Morgan outside the concert area were also thoroughly questioned. Some people said they had seen the young girl walking alone, looking confused and panicked, but no one could clearly remember her face or identify anyone who was with her at the time. The deeper the investigation, the more vague the clues became, and the case was at risk of falling into a deadlock. However, a surprising turn of events occurred when the investigation team analyzed the DNA collected from the scene and compared it with the National Crime Database. Although the sample collected was extremely small, the results showed a match with the DNA of a suspect involved in a sexual assault that occurred in 2005 in Fairfax, Virginia. Unfortunately, no one was arrested at that time, so the true identity of the suspect remains a mystery. Not willing to let the case sink into oblivion, the police expanded the scope of the investigation into other areas and conducted a thorough review of the records of subjects with criminal records related to acts of assault and harassment of women. It was during this process that the name Jesse Matthew Jr. began to attract the attention of the authorities. Jesse is a local hospital worker living in Charlottesville. His gentle exterior hides a scandalous past. Jesse was accused of multiple sexual assaults while he was a college student. Although he was never formally charged due to lack of evidence, the accusations were enough to put him on the police's radar. With extreme caution, the police approached Jesse Matthew discreetly and brought him in for questioning as a witness. At first, Jesse was quite cooperative, but as the conversation turned to the night of Morgan's disappearance, confusion and uncertainty began to show on his face. Jesse claimed that he did not know the victim and was definitely not near the scene that night. However, when comparing his statement with the location data of his phone and images from the camera system, the police quickly discovered inconsistencies in his words. Sensing signs of suspicion, the investigators continued to summon Jesse Matthew once more. This time, they dug deeper into his daily routine, past relationships and places he frequented. Not stopping there, the investigators proactively revealed that they had collected a DNA sample from another past attack, and it matched the DNA they had in hand. The psychological pressure was mounting rapidly. Jesse kept changing his story, his eyes wavered, his voice trembled, and he repeatedly dodged questions about the night of the murder. Finally, after several tense hours, he excused himself, claiming he was feeling unwell. Just hours after that interrogation, Jesse Matthews suddenly disappeared from his residence. He left behind his job, his car, and his phone, clear signs of his intention to flee. Police immediately issued a nationwide warrant for his arrest. Within days, Jesse was arrested in Galveston, Texas, while hiding quietly on a deserted beach. After being extradited to Virginia, Jesse Matthew was formally charged with kidnapping and murder. A search of his residence and car yielded additional biological evidence, including DNA that matched the Morgan Harrington case. But the most shocking thing was that the forensic results showed that this same DNA also linked Jesse to another case that happened in 2014. Hannah Graham, another University of Virginia student who went missing and was murdered. The connection between the two cases shocked the public. For the first time, the police found an important link connecting two heartbreaking tragedies with the same single suspect. The legal case was quickly completed with close coordination between investigative agencies, forensic experts, and the federal legal system. All the evidence from DNA, witness statements, escape behavior, and criminal past created a tight legal siege, closing in on Jesse Matthew. The arrest of Jesse Matthew not only brought justice to Morgan Harrington and Hannah Graham, but also served as a profound warning about the potential danger of criminals who disguise themselves as kind and gentle. People who few expected to hide an unimaginable, terrifying darkness inside them. The trial of Jesse Matthews Jr. attracted special attention from the public and the media. From early morning, hundreds of people lined up outside the courthouse in Charlottesville to watch a case that has haunted the community for many years. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was heavy and tense. All eyes were on the man in the dock, the man accused of taking the lives of Morgan Harrington and Hannah Graham. The prosecutor opened by reenacting the entire crime scene, from the matching DNA evidence to the defendant's unusual escape. Images of Morgan and Hannah, two young girls with bright futures cut short in the blink of an eye, were shown, silencing the entire audience. Forensic experts, investigators, and witnesses took turns testifying, each detail tightly strung together to paint a gruesome picture of the crime. The defense tried to argue that there were no eyewitnesses, that the DNA sample could have been contaminated, and that Jesse Matthews' flight was a panic attack. However, these arguments were quickly refuted by the consistent and undeniable evidence. The moment that brought the courtroom to a standstill was when Morgan's parents took the stand. Dan Harrington, his voice trembling but determined, described the pain and loss his family had suffered, a pain that could never be replaced. The heartfelt sharing brought many to tears. After several days of trial, the jury quickly returned its verdict. Jesse Matthews was found guilty of both crimes. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without parole, the maximum sentence possible. He emphasized that the defendant's actions were cruel, inhumane, and a serious threat to society. The verdict was final. Justice had been served. Morgan Harrington's death has left an indelible scar on the hearts of her family, friends, and the entire Virginia community. The pain is not only felt by her loved ones, but also serves as a grim reminder of the fragility of personal security, something we sometimes easily take for granted. Morgan was unable to return to college, to the unfulfilled dreams, and to the simple moments she should have enjoyed. But her story is about more than loss. It raises profound questions about our responsibility to recognize and respond to signs of danger, even the smallest ones. We often think of tragedy as happening far away, to other people. But in reality, a moment of inattention, a look of indifference, or a silent silence can pave the way for evil. Therefore, observing, listening, and intervening at the right time, even with strangers, is always a humanitarian duty that cannot be overlooked. Morgan's story also emphasizes the importance of strict security regulations, the application of technology and investigations, and above all, the consensus between the law and the community to prevent similar tragedies. And then the final question remains, for all of us, if it were you, if it were me, what would we do when faced with unusual signs? Could a small action today save a life tomorrow? The 911 phone rang on a quiet Christmas Eve in Albany. A panicked male voice said, "She's been shot. It was an accident." But was it really an accident? But was it really an accident? Sky Lemmons-Dixon, 23 years old, is a girl who makes anyone who meets her feel the light inside her. Growing up amidst loss, losing her mother when she was only 11 years old, Sky was a broken child. But instead of falling, she chose to love. Love life, love animals, love friends, and simple dreams of a better future. On the night of December 25th, 2023, when the whole city of Albany was immersed in sparkling lights and festive bells, Sky was in a small apartment on State Street with three friends, Patrick Dean, Ibrahim Hammond, and Michael Varlak. They drank, talked. It seemed like a warm, festive night like any other. But in a split second, gunshots rang out. And then Life was cut short. A bullet, an excuse of an accident. A young girl collapsed, never to wake up. In that small apartment, what really happened? A moment of carelessness, or a dark secret hidden behind lies? This is not just a story about a shooting. This is the retelling of a night that none of them, and none of us, will ever forget. December 25th, 2023 began like any other holiday. People gathered together, sipping wine, laughing and sharing old stories. For Sky Lemmons-Dixon, that Christmas Eve was a quiet moment in the busy days. She went to the apartment on State Street where close friends gathered, celebrating the holiday together in a cozy atmosphere. In the small room, only a few square meters, yellow lights cast a glass of red wine. Soft music played from the phone speaker. The three men present in the room, Patrick Dean, Ibrahim Hammond, and Michael Varlak, were all familiar faces to Sky. They had talked many times, even drank together on previous occasions. For Sky, it was a place close enough to not need to be on guard. But it was in that space that the tragedy began. Around 10 p.m., amid the excitement, Patrick Dean suddenly pulled out a pistol. No one knew why, perhaps to show off, perhaps just an impulsive act after having had too much to drink. But the looks in the room began to change, from relief to confusion, then anxiety. No load, Dean might have said in a careless way, someone later recounted. But the moment his finger unconsciously touched the trigger, things became irreversible. A deafening bang rang out. Sky collapsed. The bullet went straight through her head. The atmosphere instantly fell into chaos. The room, once filled with laughter, was now silent, save for heavy breathing and panicked eyes. Dean dropped the gun, trembling. Hammond whispered over and over, "Accident, just an accident." Varlak sank to the floor, holding his head. No one left the room. They frantically called 911, trying to figure out how to explain. But the truth was written on the floor in Sky's blood, clear and indelible. There had been no fight before, no explosive argument, no warnings or signs of anything unusual. Just a stupid move and a fateful end. In that apartment, everyone was a witness, and no matter what they said, the truth was the moment the gunshot rang out, when time seemed to stop, and the whole room was plunged into a cold that did not belong to winter, but to death. The gunshot did not last long, but its echo made the room silent as if time had stopped. For a few seconds after the shot, no one spoke. No one moved. No one dared to believe what had just happened. The first to react was Ibrahim Hammond. He rushed to where Sky lay motionless on the floor, eyes wide open, hands still gripping the edge of the chair. A small stream of blood oozed from her left temple, dark red, slowly as if life was trying to cling to its last moments. Michael Varlak stepped back, mumbling something indistinct, his hands shaking, his forehead breaking out in cold sweat. Patrick Dean stood as if petrified, his bewildered gaze directed at the gun now lying at his feet. I didn't mean to," he whispered unconsciously. Only a few dozen seconds later, Hammond was the one who pressed the phone. The 911 call was made in a state of complete disarray. His voice was shaky and broken. She's been shot. She's not breathing. I don't know what to do." The operator kept calm, telling them not to leave the scene and to immediately administer first aid if possible. But the truth was, none of them knew how. And Sky, though her eyes were still open, was starting to lose color. The ambulance and police arrived in less than 10 minutes. Neighbors had begun to open their doors, and a few people from the hallway were peering into the apartment in horror. The paramedics entered first. A nurse bent down to check her pulse, and another prepared a resuscitation machine. Sky was still breathing, albeit faintly. They quickly put on a neck brace, loaded her onto a stretcher, and rushed her straight to Albany Medical Center. The police immediately began to reconstruct the scene. The small apartment was no longer a place of laughter or festive wine. The carpet where Skye had fallen was soaked with blood, a silent circle. The wine glasses were still on the table. The music was still playing. Everything was a picture of calm in the storm of panic. There was no sign of a struggle, no scratches, no screams from before, but the cold permeated every corner, and the air carried a distinct metallic smell, the smell of blood and death, the kind of thing Christmas should never be. Skye Lemmons-Dixon had been found half dead, and that was just the beginning of a nightmare that would last for months. When the police sealed off the apartment on State Street, everything seemed to stand still at the moment of the tragedy. The small living room, the chair where Skye had sat, the unfinished glass of red wine, the music speaker still playing a sad melody, all became silent witnesses to the fateful moment. At the scene, the first thing investigators noticed was the pistol lying near the table leg, with no obvious cartridge, but still with smoke stains inside. Next to it, a single shell casing was found. The bullet had penetrated the victim's left temple, traveling in a straight, deadly trajectory. There were no signs of a struggle. No objects were knocked over. This made the investigation team wonder, was this really an accident as initially reported? The forensic results a few days later raised even more suspicions. The medical examiner confirmed that the bullet was fired from close range, very close, and that the trajectory of the bullet suggested that the victim was sitting in a vulnerable, defenseless position. Skye died from severe head trauma, which led to a coma and brain death after a week of treatment. One notable detail: Dean's hand still had gunpowder residue, which proved that he was the one who pulled the trigger. But why was he holding the gun? And was it an unintentional act or something else masked by silence? The investigation was forced to dig deeper. Soon after Skye Lemmons-Dixon was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, the Albany Police Department immediately launched an investigation. The three people present at the scene were identified as Patrick Dean, Michael Varlak, and Ibrahim Hammond. And those were the first three names detained for questioning. There were no strangers, no signs of forced entry, and no surveillance cameras in the apartment. Like a chess game without all the pieces, all clues depended on testimony. The first round of questioning took place that night. All three insisted that the incident was an unfortunate accident. Dean said that he had accidentally picked up the gun and didn't think there was a bullet. Varlak was defensive. I wasn't involved. I was just drinking and talking. Hammond repeatedly emphasized that no one did it on purpose. However, it was the excessive synchronicity in the stories that made the investigators suspicious. Each repeated the same script, the same phrases, the same descriptions, as if they had prepared their answers in advance. But in the small details, holes began to appear. During the second interrogation, Dean accidentally said that he had shown the gun to Skye, completely contradicting his first statement that he just held it for fun. Meanwhile, Hammond said that Skye had never touched the gun. A secret recording from the interrogation room's microphone showed that when an investigator left the room, Dean whispered to Varlak, "Just say it the same way. Don't change anything." This detail became the first point of failure in the deceitful picture they were trying to paint. The forensic department continued to review the evidence. The gunpowder residue on Dean's hand matched the bullet. On the gun, the fingerprints were his alone. Neither Varlak nor Hammond left any traces of contact. Notably, a small amount of blood that did not belong to Skye was found on Dean's sleeve, a possible reaction to pulling the trigger at close range. The psychological twist came in the second week. As the police separated each suspect, they began to change tactics. With Dean, they didn't question him. They talked about Skye. They talked about the animals she had raised, the children she had tutored, the dreams she had yet to realize. Dean's silence lasted 17 minutes before he burst into tears. "I was just trying to scare. I didn't mean to," Dean confessed in his third statement. But he quickly retracted his statement and blamed a mechanical problem with the gun. The police saw Dean as wavering, someone who knew he was guilty but wasn't ready to face it. Meanwhile, an unexpected witness emerged. A neighbor who lived next door reported hearing a man's voice laughing loudly about a gun a few minutes before the explosion, but no screaming or fighting. This detail helps to reinforce the idea that the incident was not about self-defense or an argument, but rather an act of recklessly carrying a gun in the air, leading to serious consequences. On January 3, 2024, Patrick Dean was officially charged with second-degree manslaughter, illegal possession of a weapon, and destruction of evidence. Michael Varlak, although not directly involved, was prosecuted for possession of a weapon and sentenced to 3 to 6 years in prison. Ibrahim Hammond was further investigated after his testimony was found to be full of discrepancies and was eventually charged with perjury, facing 2 to 7 years in prison. The investigation file is more than 200 pages thick, including testimony, forensic examination results, traces of weapons, crime scene reports, and even criminal psychology analysis. It shows a series of uncontrolled behavior, disregard for safety, and evasion of responsibility after the consequences occurred. The case ended with an unanswered question. Was this really just an accident, or was it a tragedy born of subjectivity, negligence, and unstable character disguised as friends? For Skye's family, the truth is not in the testimony. It is in the fact that she is dead and no one can bring her back. June 12, 2025. The Albany County Courthouse was packed. The air in the courtroom was thick, not because of the summer heat outside, but because of the heavy feeling of eyes watching one man sitting silently in the dock. Patrick Dean. After nearly 2 years of investigation, adjournment, negotiation, and trial, Patrick Dean appeared in court charged with 3 counts: second-degree manslaughter, unlawful possession of a weapon, and tampering with evidence. Beside him stood his defense attorney, while the prosecution consisted of 3 people, led by a sharp-tongued female prosecutor who had been with the case from day one. Dean did not argue. He pleaded guilty. However, the trial did not end quickly. Judge William Little asked for full testimony, reports, and especially statements from the victims' families, as a way to close the journey of justice, not just with the law, but with truth and emotion. The shocking testimony came from Skye's sister, Zoe Lemons Hall. Her voice was shaking, but her eyes were firm. She said, "You can apologize. But what Skye needs is not an apology. She needs a life." Skye's aunt, Karen Lemons, also stood up. "Skye asked me, 'Am I worthy of love?' And I said, 'You are the light.' That light is now extinguished." Outside the court, the crowd carried pictures of Skye, candles, flowers, and signs calling for gun control. The case has been the focus of the media for months, not only because of its tragic nature, but because it reflects the reality that guns still infiltrate every corner of life, even in the place that seems safest, among friends. The final verdict was announced. Patrick Dean was sentenced to 16 to 19 years in prison. No one applauded, no one cheered. There was only a silence as a confirmation. Justice does not bring anyone back, but at least the person responsible has been named. In the yellow light of the courtroom, Dean's eyes were filled with tears. It was unclear whether it was because of regret or because he knew he would spend the rest of his life in the dark. As for Sky, the girl who loved animals and loved to laugh gently, she would forever stop at the age of 23, never to hear the verdict or know that her name had become a symbol of a pain that went beyond the individual. Sky Lemmons-Dixon is no stranger to the small community in Albany. She was the friendly neighbor, the gentle friend, the girl who once took in stray cats and dogs and spent her meager salary helping others. But today, when mentioning her name, people cannot separate it from a gunshot and an evening that will never be forgotten. The loss left behind is not just the death of a young person. It is the void where there should have been laughter, maturity, simple dreams like opening a small bookstore or adopting a blind cat. It is the broken hearts of loved ones who must continue to live with the memory of something that could have been avoided. The Sky case is not simply a personal tragedy. It raises big questions about safety, responsibility, and the law. Why is it so easy for someone with a criminal record to own a gun? Why is it that in a space of friends, no one stops dangerous actions? And why do we only face the consequences when lives are lost? Justice has spoken, but it cannot bring Sky back. The only thing left is a profound reminder. A moment of inattention, a thoughtless act, can take away another person's life. Sky's story also asks each of us, not only about gun control, but also about trust, responsibility, and humanity. Are we living carefully enough to protect the people we love? And when faced with the choice between silence or action, what would you do if you were a witness to that fateful moment?